It's a startup in India, started in 2018. And as a day job, I'm a technical support director for Dhruva Data Solutions, which is a data protection. So that's where you see both the fields marry each other, data protection and security, and hence this topic called as how disaster recovery can protect from ransomware. So that's about me. And as we further dig into the topic, we'll talk about certain use cases and you'll be able to get to know me more a little bit. So let's look at the agenda that we have today. We're going to talk about the trends that we are seeing in ransomware, compare a couple of years and see what's happening, what's the trend. We'll look at a disaster recovery. We'll try and compare the traditional disaster recovery with the disaster recovery as a service. We'll look at why just subscribing to disaster recovery is not enough. And we'll look at the critical areas of protection needs in terms of your data protection and why it is critical for us to keep practicing what we have purchased in terms of service. And finally, we'll talk about, not talk, but just go through the demo of basic backup configuration and kick off a failover job for disaster recovery. With that, let's move on and look at the ransomware trends. The stats that I'm presenting to you is coming from the Global Threat Report from CrowdStrike 2022. It clearly showcases a surge in the ransomware related data leaks in 2021. Compared to 2020, in 2021, you can clearly see that 82% rise. And that's massive. It And on the right hand side, if you see it, it kind of lists down all the industries and markets that are being impacted by it. And if you look at the chart, it's on the climbing on each of the market segment that you see. They all have a surge. Nobody is left out. I mean, looking at the ransomware attacks and the data leaks along with it, everybody is impacted with it. Whether it is manufacturing, engineering, technology, logistic, academy, whatever, all fields are impacted by ransomware. Now, what does that mean? If there is a surge in ransomware attacks, if there is a surge in data leaks, the whole theme of cybersecurity comes from this surge. When there is an when ransomware or when the data leak becomes an imminent threat, it is also imminent that there needs uh, of more tools, technology, and people to come together and build something that could safeguard industries, safeguard businesses, safeguard humans from such attacks. And that is where I, I am trying to present the concept of disaster recovery that could be the last leg in your security posture. Now, when we talk about security, you could start from having an antivirus, or even before that, when you're implementing your network, when you're making a software, when you're writing codes, you could do your sanity, you could do your VAPT, you could do your ISO standard implementations. And once all of that is done, then you would come into a play where everything is operational and you would need to have firewalls in place so that nothing can intrude in between. You could have people trained across with it. But can it give you a guarantee that uh, can it give you a guarantee that you are 100% safe and secured from any such attacks? In my experience, I don't think anybody or any such product has been built today which can give you that guarantee. So when there is no such guarantee, then what is that giving us the confidence that, hey, at any given point in time, I even if I get an attack, I could come back operational and come back running in no time, right? That's your backup and recovery. That's what gives you the confidence. If you've got a very good, a solid data protection strategy implemented for yourself, you have a nice sleep every night. You'll not be worried. And that is why disaster recovery or data protection becomes very important as your as a component in your security posture in any organization. Now, let's look at disaster recovery, the traditional disaster recovery, and disaster recovery as a service. Now, before we look at disaster recovery, now in terms of disaster recovery, what it means is a disaster has happened and now you have to recover. In much simpler terms, you have to restore your data. You have to restore your data, you have to restore your services, and you have to bring your machines, your network, everything back up again post the disaster. Now, this disaster could be anything. It could be a natural disaster, it could be a ransomware attack, it could be a fire attack, whatever, right? So, anything in a bigger bucket disaster. Now, there has to be a step before it. If you have to restore, you need to have backup, which is why backup is the first step to do before you even think of disaster recovery. Hence, you have so many vendors playing in the market. You have IBM, you have Veritas, you have Druva, you have Rubrik, you name it. There are thousands and thousands of vendors that are available in the market that are giving you backup as a service functionality. And along with that, they would also give you a disaster recovery as a service. But if you look at 5 to 10 years from ahead, I'm sorry, 5 or 10 years back in time, you would realize that there was something called as bare metal recovery, or there people used to host machines, right? People used to make snapshots of machines and keep it handy. As the IT admins, you would just keep the snapshots ready with you. And if you have to build the machines again, you would just play those CDs and DVDs and bring those machines back up and running within no time. It wouldn't take that 45 minutes of Windows installation. It would, like, within next 20 minutes, you have your machine up and running with the operating system, with the partitions, with the applications, with all kind of stuff. And you're like, wow, everything is up and running. And so what happened is the same technology started being worked upon by various vendors, and they orchestrated the whole mechanism of ADR into a feature or an offering from the vendors, and they called it disaster recovery, which means it would basically, what it'll copy the operating system files, it'll ensure that your data backup is saved, and it'll make a bootable copy of it. And at times when you need to restore your machine, it'll let you play that bootable copy and bring your machine back up and running. That was traditional DR. And limitations with that was that it has to be an on-premise solution. You need to have your backup server configured in your on-premise. You need to have your media server in your on-premise, whether it is a tape drive or a hard disk or an array, whatever. It's all has to be in your on-premise. Then next level came in that why not have a disaster site, which means your production site and your disaster recovery site are two different sites. And that's when you got your high availability and replication products come into play, and you started using those. But today we are living in an era of cloud computing, which means you can imagine a service or you can imagine an offering, and that could be a cloud driven service. Similar thing happened with disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is a very important offering or a functionality of a product. So why not make it as a service, which means the overall orchestration, coupled it with an infrastructure that's sitting on cloud, such as AWS cloud or Azure cloud or GCP, wherever you have your infrastructure, you could easily orchestrate the on-premise configuration or the mechanism or workflow to bring your machines up and running within no time. That has now been orchestrated within cloud. And the vendors, when they're doing it on cloud, offering it to their customers as disaster recovery as a service. Now, when you do that, what are the benefits you're getting? Number one, by default, your cloud backup solution is by default air gapped. When I say air gap, there is a distance between your on-premise and the snapshots that you're putting in the cloud. It's a major concept of data protection because it's one of the theme that goes out in the market that you need to keep in mind when you're purchasing a offering or a software for your data protection needs. That is the data protection or the data that is going to be protected. Will they have air gapped in or not? Right? So cloud-based services by default are air gapped. The second important aspect is they are now a managed service. Somebody else is managing it for you. You don't have to invest in it by having your new hardware, by adding more people, by managing it by having by having a different team to take care of the whole disaster recovery site. So it's all being managed by a third party. All you have to do is get the service and let them handle it. So it's now offloaded. And because of that, it gives you cost efficiency, which means you're not investing in your hardware, not investing in people, not investing in tools, not investing in processes, not investing in a location, nothing of that sort, right? So it saves a lot of money for you. At the same time, the vendors from where you're purchasing these services, they are giving you redundancy, they're giving you scalability. So just think of a situation where you had to restore or recover a machine which had 100 gigs of data, and you're restoring it, and suddenly, because the operating system files grew larger, 100 GB is not enough, it needs 105 GB, uh, hypothetically. So what happens? You go and purchase or provision another 5 GB or 10 GB of data for that new machine, and then you try the recovery again. But what happens in the cloud? You just change the instance type, flick of a second, go there, select instance of M2, you select M5, and boom, you run the recovery, and it is successful. So it brings agility, it brings scalability, so easy. So all of that comes with cloud, and I hope it kind of gives you or encourages you to start looking at the cloud-based services for DRaaS, because it's very easy. Now, I believe when I've given you enough information about moving towards the cloud-based disaster recovery, I also want to alert you that just subscribing to that service is not going to be enough. If as an admin or as a decision maker, you feel that, okay, now I am subscribed to disaster recovery as a service, we are good, we are safe. No, we are not. It is not an insurance service. It's not like when the disaster will strike, you will call this vendor and the vendor is going to do magic about it. It's not going to happen. Why? Because it's a mutual responsibility of managing the disaster recovery as a service, which means all your on-premise component that you're protecting, you need to ensure that you're protecting the right data. You need to ensure that you're protecting at the right intervals. You need to ensure that it is operational when you need it. So all of that, we will talk about it. However, in order to do that, you need to keep auditing your disaster recovery process. And either you do it quarterly, you do it yearly, it is all how you define your timelines. But as a decision maker, you should ensure that disaster recovery audits are in place and they are being done, because that is what's going to make people agile in terms when the disaster strikes. Very important. There are two major reasons why we need to keep practicing disaster recovery. We'll dig into that a little more. And in order to do that, we'll look at first, we'll look at what are we protecting, right? If we talk about your Windows machine first, for a Windows server, your C drive is critical for bare metal recoveries, because if you don't pull that or you don't protect that, you don't have your system state, which means if you're just backing up D, E, F, or other drives or your RAID array, which means you backed up your data. You've not backed up the system state, which means you cannot bring up the system again. You will have to go back to restore your data on a newer installed operating system. Hence, it's critical to understand what you're backing up for what reason, right? So you have to first plan, create your protection plan, and then only you should do it, which is why I have put in PDCA as one of the aspect for us, because whatever we drive, we should always follow PDCA. We plan, we do, we check, and then we act when time comes. So in this case, we need to understand what we are protecting. And in order to do that, we have to identify what is critical for us in order to look at the business. And if you kind of plot it against certain risk, if that risk was to happen, what is critical for you to come back up and running? If you define that, that gives you clear picture of what you need to protect. Then you need to look at your tolerance level. How much of data loss can you tolerate? That your business can run, function, even if you have lost, let's say, 1 day worth of data, or let's say 2 hour worth of data, or let's say 30 minutes worth of data, totally depending on your business. And these two important questions will help you define your RTO, which is a recovery time objective, and RPO, which is your recovery point objective. So if you have defined the tolerance level for your loss, then you will be easily able to say my RPO is like 30 minutes or my RPO is 1 day. So that's very critical. RTO is more like how quickly can you become functional or how quickly can you restore. That is dependent on your infrastructure and the vendor's infrastructure in terms of how quickly they could send the files back to you, right? Now, in order to, once you have defined that, then you have to go back and look into your backup configuration, which means what are you backing up? If you have a SQL server, are you protecting your C drive as well as your D drive, E drive, where you host your databases, your LDF and MDF files are located? Or you're protecting your C drive and then you have another agent which is capable of protecting databases and be able to restore them when need comes. Along with that, you need to look at your retention points. How much or how many snapshots are you saving for your data? So if your RPO says you have a tolerance of 1 day worth loss of your data, then you can run backups every next day, right? So you can restore it to the previous day. So one of the great functionality that the vendors provide today is the GFS, grandfather son method of backup, which kind of gives you a predefined set of snapshot, which means you'll have X number of daily snapshots, X number of weekly snapshots, X number of monthly snapshots, and X number of yearly snapshots. So as time keeps going, you will start accumulating those snapshots for yourself. Now you might have it in your mind that if I have like 100 snapshots, all of those snapshots will be sitting on the cloud and increasing my cost. Well, it will a little bit, but all vendors have deduplication and compression enabled. Deduplication is a great concept because it helps you reduce your overall footprint on your cloud storage, because deduplication will only store newer chunk of data. All your duplicate chunk of data gets compressed together and only one copy of that is kept and index is saved separately. So deduplication is the savior of the day if you are worried about cost implications. Then you need to also ensure that inclusions and exclusion settings are appropriately set. And for this, I have a live example coming from one of my experiences where I was supporting a customer and helping them do a disaster recovery. And the machine would come up, everything would come up. However, they would end up complaining that their important critical files, because they were a media house, their MP3 files were not getting restored. And if you look at any of the vendors in an organization or in a business setup, MP3 file or movie files are considered non-important. And those are considered as default exclusions in your product or in any of the backup configuration. So what the admin had done was admin had created filters to exclude MP3 files. And when we troubleshot further, we realized that the MP3 files were never backed up. This was a media house. Losing all their MP3 files was like devastating for them, which kind of points us back to the first point. What is critical for us? For this media house, MP3 files were the most critical data, which I believe they failed to identify and protect. So and that example is very close to my heart. And every time I get involved in any kind of implementation, talking with any customer, ensure that the customers go through this proper practice of identifying what is critical for their business in terms of data. So once you have defined that, and once you have done your accurate configuration of your backup, you can feel comfortable because now you're protecting everything that's required. With that, and once everything is being backed up, the tools, technology in the backend are so clever that it takes care of the orchestration of disaster recovery in the backend. So you as a user don't have to worry about what's happening in the backend, but you as a user needs to be worried about, will it be functional or not when you need it? And that is why I say practice makes us perfect. And it is true in terms of technology also. Why? So you get a disaster recovery service and you implement that. your backups are running, reports coming clean, everything is successful, right? Now, if you're not testing your disaster recovery, you wouldn't know whether it is successful or not, and you would not know what are the caveats that may hit you when disaster happens. So if you're only thinking your backups are successful, so at the time of restore, my disaster recovery will be 100%, let's not dream, right? Let's look at ways and mechanisms with which we could test our disaster recovery. Now, why it is so important is because number one, your environment is made up of operating system, applications, databases, files, folders, users. All of this keep changing every day. Operating systems would release service packs, security updates, applications would release updates, users will change, your employees would change, somebody will go away, new users would come in. All of this is a very changing dynamics. And the vendor that you purchased disaster recovery service will also release new features and functionality and updates. So are you testing after implementing the service, after the new releases have come in? Are you testing your disaster recovery? If not, then you should, which is why auditing your disaster recovery on a regular basis is very important. Number two, in your company, by default, will have a emergency response team, and this emergency response team is responsible to kind of act when disaster happens. And if they are not trained, if they are not clear in their mind, and if the steps that they have to take is not on their fingertips, you're calling a disaster over a disaster, right? So that's why practicing the overall DR strategy is very critical for any organization's success during the disaster, which is why it brings agility and it makes the overall process go flawless. Which is why I always keep coming back to the topic that you have to do practice of disaster recovery configuration that you've done, and you have to run those failovers and failbacks. You have to do that on a regular cadence. With that, we'll quickly move into the demo and go through the basic setup. And that's after that, I would be able to take any questions if there are any. So Thank you. So that kind of sums up the demo. And we had a very important question wherein it was like, how do we ensure that the cloud vendor provides us the assurance that they themselves are not susceptible to such ransomware attacks and your data is safe. So I've kind of answered it on the chat, but to sum up, the cloud vendors will have a much stronger team, a dedicated team monitoring the complete infrastructure that's implemented on the cloud, as well as you could safeguard it from your side, such as MFA, SSO should be enabled on your browser-based logins, as well as look for the vendors who are providing you golden snapshots, who are providing you data lock features, who are providing you capabilities to ensure that you're able to kind of scan the data while you're trying to restore, and also who have these recovery guarantee kind of a functionality and feature that the vendors are today kind of coming up with such subscriptions, right? So look up for vendors who are kind of providing these functionalities for you to be like 100% sure of your investment. With that, I don't see any more questions, and I would say thank you so much for having me on this discussion. It was great time sharing my learnings.